We're going to be going ahead and start the rewards mastermind right now. And our topic of today is we're going to be preparing, is about preparing and improving the year-end compensation process. And so just some introductions here. My name is Sam Reeve. I'm your host, and I'm the founder of CompTeam. And I'm also here with a couple other hosts that we have on CompTeam as well. We have Howard Neiswitz, who is our compensation strategist. She has a deep level of expertise, has been in compensation for 25 years or more now, Howard, I believe. Yeah. And then we have Heather Hormel, which is our CompTeam systems implementation specialist and data expert, and she'll be joining us on the call as well. And then to introduce you to our panel today, as I should be going through these slides here, so you can look at these bios a little bit more later. But to introduce our guests today, we have Perry Doody and Chris Jackson. Both are from CompTrak. And like I said, we're going to be talking about some of the pains that clients and those that are currently on spreadsheets trying to manage your year-end process on spreadsheets are feeling, and really in discussing of why that is just, they need to evolve into a new reality. I mean, the doing compensation on spreadsheets in today's age is and from my perspective, even a little irresponsible. I mean, there's so much data issues that can happen, mistakes or data security. We'll be talking about a lot of that today. So before we get started here, I want to make a couple announcements. I mean, everything that's this forum that we're talking about today is going to be posted on the CompTeam website a couple days after we have it here. So we'll be able to make sure that all the attendees are able to get a recorded version and also a hard copy of this presentation. So that'll be available. And then also I encourage everybody to use the chat function as much as possible. I'm going to be on the chat a lot during this discussion, just trying to make sure that any questions that come through the chat that I can propose those to the attendees here, and so you can get your questions answered. So feel free to do that. Also, I know that many of you, we have a lot of colleagues in the industry, and we're really trying to make this the rewards mastermind a place where we can all get together as professionals to further the profession, to make sure that we're all in the know of a lot of the techniques that are out there, and so we can leverage those and the companies that we serve and the people that we serve, so that we can improve our effectiveness. And so of course we're bringing a lot of practitioners here, a lot from that are solution providers that have software systems and are just our thought leaders in the industry that can tell us a lot about the pain points that other companies are suffering, and to give us a perspective on how those are solved across the industry. And so this is intended to be a very informational session. Although we have vendors that are selling things such as CompTrak, the intention is informational. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to the group and Perry and Chris. So I know that Perry, we talked about you sharing the presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this here, and then you can go ahead and take over the meeting.
Great, and thanks, Sam. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. All right, so I'm here with Chris Jackson, our Vice President of Client Development, and I'm Perry Doody, Chief Product Officer. And I just want to start off by thanking CompTeam. We've been working with them now for a few months, and when we got the invitation, we thought, what a wonderful opportunity to come here and talk a little bit about our journey. A little bit about myself is that, like Howard, I've been involved in comp for 25 years. And as much as we're going to talk a little bit about technology, I do see myself as a compensation professional who is really charged over the years with operationalizing compensation plans. And for many years, my weapon of choice, if you will, was Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Access. And there are some limitations, and I think how Sam actually talked about it, some inherent risks or lost opportunity, if you will, in terms of what you can do with that rich information. And if we kind of take a step back and and think about what we do, you know, compensation plans, incentive plans, all these really unique and creative plans that companies put in place, they're really there to attract and retain people. And if you can't actually share the information and remind people of the plans or why they're being incented in the way that they are, you're sort of losing a little bit, if you will, of the intended purpose. And so our intention here today is to really just talk about some things that we're seeing currently with existing and new clients, some trends in the industry, and then talk about if you're going to embark on changing your compensation process and transforming it, where to start, and share some insights on what others have done, and then also leave you with some tools and ideas, and some thoughts, if you will. And we also want to hear from you. So I would also go back to Sam. What Sam said is take advantage of the chat. Ask any questions. If we're getting too deep, tell us. If we're not getting deep enough on some items, let us know. And we want to make this as dynamic as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Chris Jackson, and I'll let Chris introduce himself. And he's just going to walk through some things that we're seeing. And then at that point, when Chris has gone through, we'll go into some of the ways that you can start to look at how to transform. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, pleasure to be on with everyone here. And I guess I probably bring a slightly different lens than everyone here. I certainly get compensation, and I've managed teams in the past, but I'm not the compensation expert. But my background actually before joining the guys at CompTrak was in digital and digital experience probably for the last 20 years. So when we think of our platform, you know, we try to look at other things that are happening in the market. We look a little bit more broadly, and then we kind of slowly distill down, kind of double click on some of these ideas. And they're really influencing, you know, some of the direction that we're taking. And I think it's interesting when we consider, and this information comes from a blend of sources. You know, Deloitte does a really nice paper that they launch every year around priorities and trends in human capital management. Some of this is also MIT research. But just the impact of employee experience, and when we think about how to drive employee experience, we're going to talk a little bit about probably online statements and just the digital platform itself are inherently just 25% more profitable. I think that speaks volumes to, you know, probably which is, you know, speaks to the 66%, which is below. Enabling and getting that digital capacity into your organization, maybe not just within statements, but in all aspects. And that could mean getting data into the hands of the organization, thinking about your employees who are probably much more millennial based now than what they used to be. And their expectation is they're looking at things on their mobile phone, right? They're looking at their iPads on an ongoing basis. They want to be talked to in a casual manner, right? There's so many nuances to this, but I think there's so many other aspects to this. And one of the ones that I think is interesting and just speaks to the dynamic that's changing is this 31% of respondents say that most or almost work is being done in teams, which to me is speaking to that. You hear about that in Silicon Valley, but I think what we're seeing is it's permeating every other industry now and how they structure themselves, not just in a pyramid, but flattening with a bunch of different little pods and teams that are producing great products on their own, and how they work together. Inherently, it creates a heck of a lot of complexity, but it's really how people want to work. So it's interesting to see that that's a big trend in the market. So when we think about some of the things we're doing in our platform, we do look out at some of these things and how they actually trickle down. Go to the next slide, Perry. There's just, you know, this is probably more of a conversational slide, and you could add all sorts of things in here, and then people would have other trends they'd probably want to add. But when we think about, and certainly I come from, you know, I've worked in e-commerce and digital experience within sports marketing as well, and various spots. These are just flowing now through what used to be just consumer centric now into the workforce. And when I start to look at what compensation is could be modernized and changed with these digital technologies, it really is kind of impressive, and the opportunity is significant. And just quickly going through them. And Perry, you know, you jump in at any time, but this idea of CX/UX, which is customer experience versus user experience, call that workforce experience, important, right? Which, you know, trickles down to personalized and mobile. This
Yeah,
idea
Chris.
of API ecosystems is the idea of plug and play, right? So you could have a core HRIS system, you could have a learning management system, you could have a compensation system. All those are best of breed, but it's just so much easier now with this idea of an API ecosystem. And go and talk to your IT folks. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk about APIs all day long. So
So
you
Chris,
go down microservice containers, probably won't get a lot into that, but it allows you to move quicker, right? The people know back in the day, who have implemented SAP, you probably do 1 or 2 releases of SAP a year because it takes about 3 months of planning just to get those out into live into the organization. Nowadays, we can do it in minutes, and it's because of things like around the architecture.
right. So Chris,
Yeah.
just a quick question. I mean, on that, when you're saying that, I mean, there's been obviously we just had an explosion of technologies. Handheld technologies are real up to date. Over the years, how have you seen that impact tools, year-end planning tools? I mean, what are people demanding now?
And
Maybe
go ahead, Perry.
I was gonna start there. So great example I like to tell people is that it's interesting how technology in our personal lives make their way into a corporation. So I'll just use an example, the Apple Watch. We're talking with a client and they said, when I go out for my run, when I've done my run, I can actually see it on Strava right away. Like the integration is seamless. And yet when I go through my year-end bonus cycle, I fill in my spreadsheets and it takes 2 to 3 days for it to actually make its way back to me in terms of a report. So there's a lot of when I say pressure, I think it's good pressure for people to take their personalized experiences and say, I want it in my organization. I want it quicker, I want it aggregated real time, and I want analytics that are very valuable that I don't have to actually download something and filter it. And so, and I think that makes sense. Like if we're, I always, we've been online banking for years and years, how that information is refreshed real time, you should, from a leader experience or an employee experience, have that same experience when you're dealing with comp.
Absolutely. I imagine that. I mean, when we think about, and I just think about my Apple Watch. I mean, I think there's some, they got to get some of the bugs out as far as, giving me the information I really want to see all the time instead of learning about all the news that I don't want to hear about. But I think that it's, as a real-time mechanism, it really can give you that information right away. And I mean, just thinking about where compensation is going in the future, as far as data, more real-time information on pay data and other trends. What other ways that you think that this real-time, these real-time avenues, such as mobile devices, do you think that we can use as manager reporting and so forth?
One of the things that we were talking to an organization, very large consulting organization, probably about a month ago. And one of the things they're actually looking at is, and I have to say, one of the most important things is you have to have your compensation data in one place with all that information. Otherwise, you can't even do these things, right? Some of this really interesting stuff that's, whether it's online statements, one down here at the bottom is this idea of proactive messaging. So we're talking to more organizations that are getting away from an annual bonus, and they're actually starting to do monthly, quarterly, that are very performance driven. And that's not all organizations. It doesn't suit all organizations. But if you're intaking that data and you have a well-structured plan that's driven around performance, around business metrics, you can, in advance of the quarter end, send notifications and nudges to people who are just shy of maybe where they have to have certain achievements or targets. So to drive a behavior, and that could be obviously on a mobile device, but again, you need that platform in place to be able to do that. But all these things start to culminate together into really driving behavior in a pseudo real-time manner to achieve corporate targets, and making sure that message is relevant for that particular individual. So I think there's some interesting things around that, around even that's just changing bonus structure, but the technology to allow for a more performance-based culture really to thrive.
Yeah, the other thing I'm going to just add on that too. So mobile is real. So it's kind of interesting. When I go to the gym, or when I did go to the gym prior to COVID and was interacting with a lot of younger people, some of them don't even have a laptop or a computer. Like they're using their phone or their tablet for everything. So when we start to think about the experience, right? Some people don't want to use their laptop for making compensation decisions. So what's the traditional approach is to give them a spreadsheet with endless number of columns on it. Well, that doesn't really work on a phone. You have to kind of render it in a way that is very simple for them. So that interaction with the device that you're operating on has to reflect sort of that leader's experience. The other thing, and when we roll out online statements to our clients, we track how they're coming in. So we can actually see how our client, what device are they using? Are they using a computer? Are they using a phone or a laptop? And Chris, I think, you know, we've seen somewhere between 70 to 80% of workforces using their phone when they actually get the link to go in. So mobile is very real. And if you're not offering both today, then I think you're really missing out, and you're probably frustrating your organization in terms of that experience.
Yeah. So just oh, go ahead, Howard. Sorry.
Yeah, putting aside all the risks that are associated with using spreadsheets and distributing them, firms have been reluctant to, share compensation information or post it outside the organization. Are you still seeing that resistance today in terms of using the cloud?
I'll start off, and then Chris can jump in. But so first, when you kind of take a step back, right, and people go, there's risk with using the cloud, but there's also risk that, if you send out a spreadsheet with all that information in it, what prevents somebody from downloading it? It's a lot of information in one place. The other thing is the reality of the workplaces today is that what you actually put on your screen, if somebody wants to take a picture of it, like, there's inherent risks with what we do. I think with the cloud, what has occurred is that, you have some pretty big reliable providers out there like Microsoft. So we're a big Microsoft Azure user, Amazon, who have really mastered the security around it. So there is more security in terms of two-factor authentication, how you actually use your corporate credentials to authenticate. So we see certainly more of a willingness, but what I would say is that I think companies have come around to the fact that there is risk with actually emailing sensitive information and things like spreadsheets. That, you sometimes have to take a step back and go, what is actually makes more sense? What actually has auditing capability incorporated into it? Are we logging everything? So I certainly see a willingness to use the cloud, and COVID is a great example where if you don't have the cloud and you're relying to go in either through like a VPN or distributing information by email when you're remote, that creates quite a few challenges on its own. Chris, I know you wanted to say a few things on that as well.
I always do. Anything related to the cloud. And, a lot of my background coming from digital, it's a lot of large financial institutions and dealing often, whether it's with a marketing group, but always with a CIO, CTO type of group. More, probably if not all, financial services groups that certainly I've been exposed to over the last few years have cloud mandates in-house. They have cloud platforms that they align to. They look at every aspect of the business, and they're doing what they're calling application rationalization. And an application could inherently just mean an Access database. It could mean an Excel spreadsheet. And they're going through and they're auditing everything. And the goal is, number one, move it to something that's commercial, off the shelf, SaaS software. Like, it's not literally off the shelf. In our case, it's a platform you can subscribe to. It's purpose built for that, is how I'd actually call that. And to move into that type of system, because that's what it's meant to do. And inherently, they have those types of audits and logs in place. But there is a mandate in most of these organizations now to move to cloud wherever possible. And cloud, in this case, would mean SaaS-based types of platforms that, again, are purpose-built versus things such as spreadsheets, Access databases. It's not just that there's risk in it. There's risk in that the people that maintain them are retiring, or they leave, and then you can't maintain them, right? And so you got this little system built up, and all of a sudden, Jimmy has retired, and we don't know how to modify this thing anymore. So there's those types of risks too, around just the human capital side of things, right? People are retiring.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know how many times I've walked into a compensation practice and somebody hands me this spreadsheet, and you're trying, the first thing you do is you have to spend like, I don't know how many hours, 10 hours or more, just trying to decipher what their mindset was when they created the thing. And so it's, and through the experience, you find, there's, formula irregularities, or you don't know what happened, and there's nothing to really capture it all. And so it's just, half the time I just throw up my hands and create something new myself, and start another 10 hours of spreadsheet design, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I always refer to this as the compensation guy or person, who a lot of companies seem to have, where this person shows up at year end and has all the secrets, if you will, to the spreadsheets and access databases. And I've seen some spreadsheets that were never intended to be used, and how they've actually been configured. I always get nervous when I open a spreadsheet and says, "Do you trust the macro? And do you want to refresh the link?" So I go, "Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here." And this is not to kind of knock on Excel. I think Excel has a purpose. I think Excel has a purpose with CompTrak. Like, we offer our clients the ability to run reports and save them to Excel and do further analysis if they want. But when you're actually, processing millions, if not hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of dollars using spreadsheets, you wouldn't stand for it for your payroll processes, right? But for whatever reason, because your comp plans are a bit unique and creative, in a lot of cases, that's what we end up with. And so even auditing, it's hard. Like, if you're sharing a spreadsheet and multiple people are touching it, who's actually made the last change? So, that governance piece as well becomes a bit of an issue. So the cloud, which, interacts with a SaaS-based software, you're logging, you're seeing who's going in, you're actually being able to track volume and other things. And so you somewhat lose that ability to do it. And not just with spreadsheets, but just old apps that were built years and years ago. And like Chris said, the retiring piece is a real concern. I've worked with some companies where people have said, what, when I retire, I don't want to be called up, in the middle of November asking, what was the logic for this particular cell?
Absolutely. So I just want to bring up one thing that Sandrine mentioned in the chat. And if anybody doesn't know Sandrine, she's a very high-level comp expert out of the Dubai area. And as comp professionals, we walk into places and we see that managers are always looking for efficiencies, which is great. But in this situation that she points out, a manager was simply just hiding rows that another, and sending off a spreadsheet that to another manager that they, so they hoping that they don't unhide the rows, right? And so I think we've all seen something similar to that. One story I have is I just, when I came into an organization about 10 years ago now, and they were running their entire equity process through a spreadsheet. I mean, and it was a financial firm, and then they just had millions of dollars. And I mean, you can imagine some of these holdings that executives have in certain areas. And you just think about, I mean, we have all heard about the fat fingered mistake that somebody makes in the stock market and it causes it to crash. I mean, if you're a practitioner and you put a decimal point in the wrong spot or add an extra zero, I mean, that could be your job. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a scary place to be in running systems off of a spreadsheet or having something like that.
Even as you mentioned before, version control, when you cut up a master spreadsheet and you send it out, and then, it gets further cut up and, who has the latest numbers? If you want to talk to a manager, are you looking at the same numbers that they're looking at? They just changed a number on their spreadsheet. If finance wants a report of where you are, oh my God, now I have to go out and collect all of the spreadsheets to get a sense. You just don't have the ability to consolidate the data like you do in an application.
You're speaking to my last trend there, Howard. Master data management, right? If it's in a platform, it can be managed and multiple people accessing it, but it speaks to that is the source of truth. And we have a lot of clients who now, and this is another trend, referring to a platform, SaaS platform, as their compensation master data system, right? So it's not in multiple spots, it's in one spot. And when you have that, it gives you the ability to be nimble to make changes. And, Perry, I was just thinking about our friends in at a European bank, and they're a fintech bank. And so with everything that was going on, instead of doing bonuses, cash bonuses, they wanted to change to equity and shift all that. And frankly, they gave a heads up of about probably 3 weeks, but we're able to build out a full program within 3 weeks and get it live into the market. You couldn't do that if you had everything living in spreadsheets. You can do it when you have compensation data and have actually the plan configured into a platform and still be able to distribute all of it and offer people self-selection to identify how much they want to participate. So by having it all on a platform, it gives you that ability. And that's just an example of in the era of COVID, right? It's a great one. Don't have the cash, but we'll do equity instead this year. And they're quickly able to do that because it's in a platform.
Right. I mean,
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Sam.
I was just going to say, I mean, just in the era of we've all heard about, trying to be more relevant and trying to be more strategic as a professional. And if we're spending all of our time, in the safety of a spreadsheet, or what we consider our own little world of loving to create these little puzzles, that as a professional, it can be kind of fun, but we're not progressing our career as individuals if we're spending all of our time building these puzzles instead of really being strategic about the information that's within them. And so I think it's really super important nowadays to be able to, as a comp professional, to elevate the profession and to start thinking more strategically instead of being stuck in these spreadsheets. It's super important.
And it's a great, I really enjoy the stories that people are telling. I mean, one story somebody told me about mail mergers and how many people generate statements by taking a data file. And the story that was shared with me is they were one off, like whatever reason in the spreadsheet, the employee number went down one, so everyone got the wrong information. So you can just imagine, when that person told me that story, I'm kind of empathizing, sitting in that person's shoes, going, imagine getting that information back where, you work on this process, you're finally at year end where you can actually create the statements, and then they all go out to the wrong person. It's hard. And what I would also say is, somebody who was charged with operationalizing comp plans, you use the tools that you have available to you, right? Excel, Access, Word. And, the problem with that is that I always found when I was working with the business didn't care what I had to do. This was the plan that they actually wanted to implement because they wanted to go out and find the best people and reward them in a particular way. So you also have to figure out, okay, how can I best service them? And there are some things that Excel is just not suited for. I mean, you talked about the tabs or the hidden rows. People use passwords that within 20 minutes, if you really wanted to, you could find tools on the internet to break those passwords. And I've been there, and I had to do that early on in my career because I was building a model for a deferred comp plan and I forgot the password that I used. And I didn't want to waste all my work. So I found these tokens on the internet that allowed me to search out and break the password, which kind of highlighted the risk, if you will. So, why do we embark on something like this? Like change, the reality is change isn't easy. And sometimes, Chris talked about one of our clients, which is a digital bank. It's sometimes easier if you're just starting off because you're not then dealing with all the chaos of your legacy systems and moving pieces. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But so why embark on this? I'm a big believer that, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that comp plans are getting more complex. As information becomes more available, and, I talked about the Strava, the running example. I can analyze my run in 10 different ways. I can look at pace, cadence. I could look at my split times. People want that same experience, and you're somewhat limited in terms of what you can do from a spreadsheet perspective. We're also seeing a requirement on AI. Can I start to predict if somebody's thinking of leaving? And, when we actually went down this road, there are ways, actually, there are some trends where people are requesting information or they're looking at their deferred comp, where you can start to become very proactive in terms of what you're doing. Chris talked about, one of the requests we're getting for people is not just looking back, but these are your targets for the upcoming year. This is how you can actually impact your total rewards package if this occurs. This is what you left potentially on the table and what was available to you. So that ability to kind of anticipate and look forward is real. And we're seeing it elsewhere. So what we just wanted to talk a little bit about here is, you know, what the why, if you will, and you know what the impact is. And when we talk about automation, you know, one of the things that we hear sometimes from a lot of companies is that they've embarked on this, but what they were getting wasn't exactly what they thought. So, and this is where I think you need to really step back and go, if our plans are really creative and innovative, we need to have a platform that reflects that is agile enough to handle the changes. And, you know, I would say that if I could take, you know, give you one piece of advice is that as much as we're talking about automation and technology, the support and understanding of your compensation plans is very critical. And, you know, one of the things, projects I was involved in early in my life was I was working with a large organization, and they were asking a lot of questions when they were implementing a software that just wasn't suited for the compensation plans. And this was a multi-currency, multi-jurisdictional question, and they were just asking about FX rates, which was a big red flag, if you will. You need to kind of work with companies and platforms that understand the nuances. And sometimes people will go, don't concern yourself with the details. With comp, concern yourself with the details and how you can actually account for it. Because if you don't, what you end up doing is creating a shadow system in Excel. And the goal should be is not to create a shadow system, but have a platform that can scale up to your needs. And Chris, or Howard and Sam and Heather, you probably have seen that, right? Where you got to be able to scale and adjust to the client's needs as they evolve.
Yeah, that's a good point, Perry. I mean, one of the big things that we see when clients are moving from an Excel spreadsheets process to a system is that it forces them to think about, gee, do we know everything that's going on about the process? A lot of companies don't even have a planned document, and when they're going through the how to put this in a system, they think, okay, well, geez, how do we do proration? What is the process we're doing here? What have you seen on that front, Heather?
Yeah, so I was enjoying that you were bringing that up. And the first thing that came to my mind is often when we start to talk about implementing a system, the first questions clients ask is, well, how can I make changes to the data on the fly? What am I going to do when I realize something isn't correct? And it really takes us a step backwards to think about what kind of preparation do we need before we start using a system, and identifying and really looking at how often were we just constantly making changes to our data and not practicing good data integrity.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, data integrity is another thing. I mean, another thing that ensures that companies have to do to go on a system like this is finally take a hard look at their HRS system, take a hard look at those different platforms that they're relying on for manager information reporting, and saying, hey, is this really what we need? Is this information all correct and up to date? And is it as companies are evolving and starting out from a startup and growing, they realize that, hey, if we don't have our data together and ready to go and used in different systems, we're just not going to be able to grow. And so and a lot of executives don't realize this from the top. And so I think that's a big misunderstanding, is that when you sell or being able to sell the idea of having a system in an organization, you might get the approval of the executive team, but then you have to go through all the pain and suffering of getting the data in order and documenting the plans and so forth. And so that can be a barrier for some companies. So Perry, how do you typically help companies navigate that?
So a couple of things. One is we feel it's important to have a balance of people who are compensation professionals who've kind of been there, I always like to think of our organization where there's the compensation side of the house, there's the IT side, and there's some really nice healthy tension in between, because we're kind of always pushing the technical side, but the team that will actually implement the software will actually be the one that supports the team, like the client, on an ongoing basis. So each client has their nuances when it comes to comp, right? So, you know, some will use, just as an example, eligible earnings. Some will use prorated salary. Some might use hours. And so those things are very, very important when you're working with a client, because they shouldn't have to change those elements to fit the software. So it's really anticipating it. The second thing that I would say is when we're working with a client, we think we should be able to take your legacy processes, a lot of those spreadsheets, and come back to you with some ideas. So we start off, like, let's call it 60 or 70% of the way there. We're not building requirements from the ground up. Just think of, you know, if you took working with a company right now that has 30 some compensation plans, well, to kind of build requirements on that from the ground up would take months. So you actually have to have people who can interpret the document and come back with a very agile framework that can accommodate those nuances. And, you know, when you do a few of these, you know what questions to ask. So if it's a multi-jurisdictional, multi-currency country, the FX rates, the transfers, those are all components that are very critical. What do you do with people who move positions during the year and move from one plan to the other? So it's kind of a, you know, just understanding and being there as well. But I think the other critical piece is agility. What we found is we've never just deployed our software and walked away. We're constantly working with our clients off cycle, looking for opportunities in terms of new things to automate. And quite frankly, if I look at the way that our platform has evolved, our clients have very much influenced our roadmap. So, you know, as an example, you know, creating agreements for equity awards in CompTrak was something that wasn't there from day one. We have a functionality where we split bonuses during the cycle to avoid finance having to go back at the end of the cycle to reconcile things. So we, you know, I always look at ourselves as a company, we're in the business of solving problems, and you might have different problems. How can we actually make it work? So I think that helps. But I also think that I think we all look for continuity, that if I'm working with a team of people and they understand my plans, when I do need them, when I call, I want to be able to talk to them. And I'm sure, Sam, it's similar to your company, that people get familiar and they really appreciate you understanding their nuances.
Is there a fear among potential clients that, oh my God, you know, to bring a software solution in means that we're going to have to change all our processes and we'll have to adapt to the platform they're offering, versus a true understanding that, you know, the platform should be, you know, customizable and fit the organization?
It's a great question, Howard, because I think it depends on what that company's experience has been. So, you know, if I think of our largest client, a global bank, 80,000 employees, when we started with them, kind of an interesting story is that they had a big company, let's just say a very well-known technology company, that sold them a piece of software that couldn't do what they needed to do. So they actually deployed it and never utilized its functionality. So they were a bit sour, if you will, right, in terms of their experience. And, you know, I kind of an interesting story is that when we started with them, we actually interviewed some of their leaders. So, you know, one of the things I'll talk about is go out and talk to your internal stakeholders in terms of what they're looking for. Very insightful. But he told me a story where year end, him and his son, he had a 12-year-old son, and they were using this entry screen, and one would read out the number and the other one would key it in. So, you know, and they do this for 300 employees. And he said, you know, when I was done, I'd press enter and I got no notification back. And, you know, a couple times it didn't even save the information. So when I was talking to this individual, like, I'll never forget this. He was getting red and upset, and he was very much soured on the idea. He goes, just give me a spreadsheet. So his feedback actually influenced our deployment. We actually gave him the ability in his tool or his version to actually upload the information. So he had like multiple ways of getting the information into CompTrak. So it really depends. If you're I often look at it too, like who's championing this internally. A lot of people want to do this, but it, like any initiative, it does require a champion. And I love working with those champions, because one of the things I think that is important is to use metrics to make your case. Show how long it took to aggregate multiple spreadsheets and chase people down to going online in real time. People see the real value in that. So yeah, I think it depends on what their history has been with implementations.
Yeah, I think that's a missing piece, you know, how compensation people and the HR, you know, generalists, how many hours they put into supporting the process and making sure it works. And management only sees the end result, which is, you know, why change? It worked. And not realizing the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it to make sure that everything was accurate. And even with all that time spent and effort spent, there inevitably are still errors, and sometimes very, you know, major and costly errors.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting, because I often, when we're doing a configuration or a deployment and working with a company, so it's the executives who get a dashboard and the leaders who get their input screens, right? And they're often, you know, my feeling is if you need a manual or instructions to do something like this, you've gone the wrong way, right? So it tends to be the most intuitive part of the software, but a lot of the magic occurs in the administrative modules in terms of how you configure the plans and able to do manual overrides and track changes. So, and you know, ultimately, if you get an online statement, that's what will sometimes sell management on it, but that's the easiest piece. It's actually a lot of the logic that goes in the back end, and really streamlining that process. Like imagine trying to chase down, we worked with a client, 800 spreadsheets. They had 800 leaders that they were managing. Just the process of, you know, if 600 of them send it in, you can't run your executive reports till they're all refreshed. So imagine just doing that real time. There's some real gains to be had if you can kind of move off those. But I'm a big believer in you have to articulate your current state and then articulate where you've gone to actually show those gains.
So how do compensation people, you know, I'm amazed that, you know, I'd be very surprised to find any compensation person say that, oh, spreadsheets are the be all and end all, and there's no better way to do this. But how do they start making the case? How do they position it to management, especially in cases where management may have already bought into a major HRMS, and you know that was supposed to be the manage all areas of HR, and now, you know, compensation is raising its hand and saying, well, it doesn't quite work for us. You know, how do they go about positioning it to get approval?
Yes, and I'm going to let Chris or the team jump in, but first, a word of caution. So I think you have a lot of large HRISs out there that are great for like your core HR functions. But, you know, when you get into sort of comp and incentive plans, you need something a little bit more specific, right? We all know that there's these nuances, and you know, if I'm a company, I want people running my businesses that are very innovative and creative to attract people. So a lot of times those kind of, let's call them advanced comp modules, aren't really suited to do what's need to be done. So that's kind of an inherent challenge. So one is, I think it's recognizing what is it that I need for the job. But two, I think, you know, I find compensation people, I'm a bit biased. I find them a real interesting group. I find them very creative and innovative because they actually have to make stuff work with the tools that they have. And there's a lot of pressure on them. Like you can imagine, I always tell comp at year end, at quarter end, people are looking to the data that you send out. I mean, we, you know, not to get sidetracked, but I always find this an interesting story, but for a large financial institution, we had to go from 4 decimal places to 5 decimal places on the FX rates, because when we were rounding, people were doing the calculations and, you know, we were a couple dollars off based on the 4 decimal places on big amounts, but they were doing the calculations. So it's, you know, comp people, they have multiple people looking at the information that they're providing. So I think when you can demonstrate to them there is a different way, a more automated way that can do as much, if not more, than what you're currently doing, I think they would rather spend time on some of the value-added stuff, the analytics, the reviewing of the plans. Like it starts to free up their time. And I don't know anybody who likes to send out emails and chase people down saying, can you please send me your spreadsheet? There's not a lot of value there. Chris, I know you've been on a lot of calls recently with people, the comp teams. What are some of your insights?
I think that is the biggest one, right? To me, the name of the game right now is talent, right? It's talent management. And so your people are your most valuable asset. And so if you got them doing things like that, emailing spreadsheets, doing consolidation, what a gigantic waste of time. So I completely echo that. People should be, they're there because they're creative, they can think, they're the ones who are going to innovate and move the organization forward. So let them do it, release them, unleash them on the organization. I think the other one is, and I hate to say it, it's a bit of FUD, right? Like when you got, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, around, is my data good? Is it at risk? There's an argument that, if you're in Europe, you are not compliant to GDPR if you are managing your compensation in spreadsheets, because it's personal data. So and that's just Europe, right? But that's certainly going to be hitting here as well at some point soon. So I think, just given what it costs to move there, but the efficiencies, but it's an insurance policy. Just by getting away from spreadsheets, it's inherently just a insurance policy. So there's some really good arguments that are maybe a fluffy around the outside. Some cultures embrace a bit more around workforce experience, which we talked about earlier. But I think just pure risk and this as being an insurance policy, and unleashing your people to do what they should be doing best, right? And that's thinking and being creative.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things that you mentioned there, Chris, as far as the fear, right? And Sandrine brought up a couple good things here. I mean, some compensation practitioners are well vested in their spreadsheets, and they're fearful of getting rid of them, that they're going to lose their job. Also, there's been bad experiences early on as certain professionals out there, they choose a system to implement, and the system doesn't turn out to be what they expected, and it makes them look bad, or it's not as flexible. And so there's a lot of these issues that people have around fear. How do you typically help them bridge that?
So great few questions, Sam. What I would say is, anyone who comes along and says, I'm going to solve all your problems and sell you this amazing platform and cover it all off, be a bit cautious. Take maybe a couple pain points. So maybe it's the bonus cycle, maybe it's your LTIP plan, maybe it's statements, and start there and do it in terms of take a modular approach, like de-risk it a bit. Like if you've been through a big implementation that hasn't gone well, tough to kind of sell that internally, right? Like in terms of let's make a huge investment. So if somebody doesn't offer you the ability to do it in a modular fashion, that would, again, be another red flag for me. They should be able to do it and prove their value and what they know. I'm also a big believer, create alliances in your organization. So I always find comp is a real interesting one because there's multiple stakeholders, right? Clearly your business has a vested interest, right? Because ultimately they're the ones trying to incent their employees and are going to receive bonuses. But from the administrative perspective of it, it's HR, and in a lot of cases, it will be finance. And I always find, Chris, we've seen this recently, when you get finance on board, and finance typically is doing forecasts, they're doing journal entries, and they're, some cases, recreating information every quarter to do these estimates. If you can build that process into your solution where literally they can click a button and see what their journal entry is, make life easier for them, they're an amazing ally to be with you on this journey. And so it's really interesting from organization to organization, but the more allies that you can create and say, let's look at this, not just from HR's perspective or the business perspectives, but how can we solve multiple things and get those wins? We all like momentum. When you actually have a few wins under your belt and you can demonstrate that, that tends to lead to other things. And, trust is something that should be earned. Nobody should come along and say, just trust me from the outset. A good vendor should demonstrate their value to you.
Find that.
So,
oh, so
go ahead, Sam.
This is just a perfect segue, your photo here, because irregardless of the first year of implementing a system, I mean, you have to sort it all out. You have to, we talked about getting your data in an order. We talked about understanding your plans from a very specific level, you know, the proration, all that kind of stuff. And when you're mapping it out, it just feels like it's something like you're showing here.
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about this. By the way, like, what do they say? Good picture like is worth 1,000 words, right? And I'm a big believer in storyteller. So I'll tell a little bit about this one. So we've been working with a client for a while, and they asked us, could you come in and actually we have a variable comp process, and we need to map it all out. So we've done some lean work, and we actually did this in 2 days. So it doesn't have to take weeks and months if you can get everyone in the room and you know, virtually today. But what this process did is it said, okay, who are the sources of information? And that's, you know, think of those red boxes to the left. Then who are your users of information? Like, you know, think of your employees, your managers. Those are people to the right. And then what are all my databases in different systems? And those are the yellow boxes. And then, you know, in between is all the processes that actually generate that. So you might not be able to tell from this, but there's information going back and forth. There's information in duplicate places. And so we actually worked with this client, and we removed, I think, 8 of these databases into one. But you know, what was used to champion this? A picture. Like, it doesn't take a lot to kind of look at this and go, okay, like, is there risk with moving to a new system? There is, but there's a lot of risk with this. What makes this, like, there are a lot of broken processes here. What actually makes this work are people spending a lot of time doing manual work going back and forth, which isn't highly reliable. But, you know, within 2 days and using some tools, not highly sophisticated tools, but literally pieces of cardboard and engaging people. I always, you know, engagement is the critical thing. You can start to map out where to start. And this was a fun process. It was a very rewarding process. But, you know, the question is this probably, if you had to do it yourself internally and we're using a lot of tools, might not look that different in terms of what's going on in your organization. But this is a good starting point, because from here you can start to design, okay, what should the system look like? For the most part, you know, just as a very basic rule, your information should be flowing from left to right. There shouldn't be a lot of information going back and forth, and so, but being able to create kind of a visual map goes a long way. So this is also a good impetus for change. And we also find too, like, there could be different groups within your organization. Like, we find internal audit, when they kind of ever get in and they look at, oh boy, you're processing this amount through spreadsheets with no audit history, that itself could be a reason why to get off the spreadsheets.
It's funny you mentioned that. That was always a big concern of mine when I was in an organization. Is you know, if we ever got audit or risks to come in, they would be shocked at the amount of confidential information flowing back and forth on spreadsheets.
Yeah, and like I said, you do what you have to do, but you can demonstrate there's better ways, right? And you know, one of the things we did for our client, for instance, is they would have different people touching a decision. So literally, they could actually click on a button and see all the historical, who's changed it, when they changed it. And, you know, that was a big improvement for them, right? Because when you have spreadsheets floating around, are you always certain that you have the last number? And the last thing you want to do is go to payroll or generate a statement where you're not 100% sure that's the last number. And that's reality.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, Chris? You know, I think when we start off with a lot of companies, not uncommon to see a process map like this. Obviously not as sometimes as extensive. But what we try to do is those white boxes in the middle of the processes, they should be embedded in the platform. If you have a process to generate a payroll file or a process to actually create awards, I'm a big believer that your solution needs to be process based and role and rules driven. And that's part of the advantage of moving to a platform in the cloud.
Yeah, one thing that I would just add on to that
Yep.
is there's and another thing that Sandrine brought up, I'm getting a lot of great feedback from her. You know, there's in a lot of emerging countries, you know, compensation is more simple. It's more simple, not as complex, and it's kept at a high level. You know, and also as we're rolling these pieces out to managers, and the next thing is making sure that it's not complex when it's showing up in front of their face, so they're not intimidated by a system, that they can see something, can easily navigate with not a whole lot of training. So have you seen advancements in these systems to accommodate those kind of concerns?
And Chris, you could maybe talk about how important the digital experience is, but a leader at most should see one screen, right? And it should be very intuitive in terms of what he or she needs to put in. I mean, when we get down to a leader, typically at most they're putting in 3-4 pieces of information, right? Maybe a performance rating, a salary recommendation, they're confirming a suggested bonus amount or putting in a discretionary amount, maybe doing a split between 1 or 2 areas, but it should be very intuitive. But, you know, just to talk a little bit about that, take something like a hierarchy. People go, oh, a hierarchy should be pretty simple. Well, you know what? Like in terms of who can actually see somebody's information is probably very critical. And depending upon the types of bonus plans, it might be different for an LTIP decision or an equity decision than it is for a merit decision. So just something on hierarchy alone, it should be simple to the user, but it should be accommodating to what you need it to do. Because if your hierarchy isn't flexible, that's an area right off the bat you can run into some challenges. But Chris, I know you've done a lot of work on, you know, keeping it simple. That again, it comes back to that digital experience. It has to be like, you know, when I look at my watch or my Apple Watch, they've been able to kind of put all that information into like a very small screen. It has to be that experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of go back to even to Howard's question of a little while ago on the business case. If you think about just that annual compensation process being just kind of that core nugget, let's start to swim upstream, right? Let's get into the finance group, right? In terms of doing their annual planning. There's other things to contemplate. How are they interfacing? Yes, they get their statements and bonuses and things to that effect, but they're also doing likely modeling, scenario planning. What if they're looking to grow into new markets or expand? How do you plan? How do you do budget planning? If you have all your compensation data in this one area now, you're a VP of finance, CFO, et cetera, you know, your budgeting and planning is really what you're doing, you know, most of the time. You can have a quick snapshot and start to do some of your planning around what it would take to grow and expand. What do I have to do this year in terms of what type of merit increases am I going to be providing, and even just cost of living bumps across the board. And then you can go all the way down from planning to executing and implementing that plan, down to, you know, you look at the individual employees. So I think when you start looking at not that core of the compensation, there's tentacles that come off from it, and you start to map those into different personas. It could be a chief administration officer who manages an equity program. There's all these different people. So when you start to think about mapping out the personas, it's more than just the comp team or the HR team that are touching the platform. Think about everyone within that ecosystem, within that reality, that upstream is doing planning around it, because often the employee salaries are the largest cost line in a balance sheet. And then you go all the way down into the employees. But think about from a persona basis, it'll then start to really help you bring to life everyone's touching it and what the potential impacts are.
Yeah. Well, one thing really quick, I mean, not to interrupt the conversation here, I know it's really engaging and interesting, but we're coming up towards the top of the hour, so we might be losing some attendees. And so what I would like to do at this point is I'm going to launch a poll for anybody that is not able to stay for the demo. And Perry's going to take us, and Chris is going to take us through a quick demo of CompTrak can do, just from a high level. But if you're interested in diving into a demo more specifically, or seeing what a system like this can do, feel free to sign up here, and then we'll make sure that it happens for you. And plus, if you have any questions on anything that we've talked about today, or if you'd just like to collaborate and share some stories, just set up some time with any of us, you can do that here, and we'll give you a call and connect. So you should see that polling there. Just feel free to use that if you'd like. But before we go on to looking at a system, why don't we finish up this and look about why to go to the cloud here?
Sure. And Chris, why don't I let you take this one, just in terms of, in terms of what is driving companies and what they're realizing. I mean, before Chris does that, I mean, if anyone's tracking Microsoft or Amazon stock, one of the big reasons is their cloud business. So it's real in terms of that transformation. So Chris, over to you to talk a few of these elements.
Yeah, I think we've touched on probably most of these. And, one of the things that Perry mentioned, or maybe it was Sam, some larger organizations, they have this, they have instilled processes and tools that they use. And, I kind of call it technical debt, right? And it's one of those things that it's really hard to get over. Those could be implementations that have gone wrong. But once you get into a platform, it unleashes the ability to continue to move quickly. And that's why I talk, there's platform release updates. You don't have to do anything, right? You're going to get new features. You're going to get, security updates real time, right? So you don't have to worry about, hitting that Microsoft update for your Excel spreadsheet. We're going to be doing that anyway. Any platform would be doing it. But I think there is also a big shift towards, different types of programs, and maybe changing them on a more frequent basis, just based upon the structure of organization. So when I think about workforce experience, how organizations, frankly, are looking to change how they operate, inherently the comp model is likely going to change along with that to a degree. And with a platform in place, it's a lot easier just to make a few quick updates to a plan, create a new plan, test it out, scenario plan. It can all happen in a single with a single lens on it. So. But I think we touched on both of these, but I thought I'd just emphasize a couple of those.
And I think too, just, wanted to leave you with this, is that, be the champion of change, right? And what we have here is some of the transformations that I like. I don't like when we say, CompTrak facilitated. We facilitated this with our partners. We did it together in terms of looking at specific things. So if you take just something as simple as, having to collect spreadsheets and aggregate them, going to CompTrak where you have a dashboard and you can see everything real time, that's a real improvement, right? Something that you can actually deliver to your leaders. Online statements, it's interesting when we get out there, a lot of companies don't have like a statement that they're sharing with their employees. And if they do, they're doing something that's very static. And so, there's an opportunity to make something real time, be proactive, show your targets. So there's a real opportunity here, and we'll leave you with some of these ideas. But I like I said, I've said this a few times, document your current state, and then, put some targets out there. What do you want to achieve? And, what we don't have here, but employee experience. Like one of the things that I find very important is go out and talk to your leaders. Talk to your leaders today. And then when you go out and you implement a system, talk to them, see how they like it, get their insights. You'll often find that some of the best ideas are people that aren't so intimately involved, because they can bring you forth some ideas. So that's, I always say, be that champion. Find allies in the organization and demonstrate to them the improvement.
I think also one of the interesting things, is the compensation folks were to actually clock the hours spent on pure administration and assign the cost of the people working to it, the number would be absolutely shocking.
It is. It is. I mean, I've coached compensation professionals where, I've challenged them to track their time for a week, on the different processes they do, from email to answering phones to, creating spreadsheets. And it's amazing the amount of time that is spent on just things that are not visible to your clients or the people you serve. And so your worth is not perceived. And so a system like this where you can deliver something that's polished, high quality, and you can spend your time on things that are more important as far as the strategy and showing yourself and your expertise and growing that. It's incredible for your career.
And you know, there's two metrics here that are a little bit hard to quantify, but I think they're real when I talk about them. So one is defects, right? Like, can you avoid having defects, either processing the wrong amount, maybe somebody seeing the wrong information, right? So, and there's strategies that you can put in place with a system where, you know, you, instead of just opening up and going out with comp decisions, you go out in a data quality phase. So people kind of look at the hierarchy and they identify maybe some issues before it's opened up to the leaders. The second one is stress levels. Like if you're managing hundreds of spreadsheets, like that's a stressful piece, right? And so you know, one of the things I would say to people, and somebody challenged me with this, is that sometimes we want to have stuff coming in and we're controlling it, but our goal should really be is to make it run as smoothly as possible with as little intervention as possible. So, you know, I think managing or I've been through year end, it can be a very stressful experience. Your goal should be is how do I actually make that more normalized and, you know, set up processes. So literally, you know, if I wasn't around, how could it actually run so that somebody could just take it and literally turn on a phase and off it goes.
Right. I mean, I don't know how many year ends, family holidays and so forth I don't know who came up with the idea of running year end during all the holidays, but man, it is tough as a compensation professional. You know?
I mean, you know, and we know like some companies actually have policies where, you know, your year end is a blackout policy where you can't take time off. And if you do take time off, you better have your phone with you, right? In the event that somebody wants to call you. So, and, you know, and that takes, and I have to stress that, like, if somebody says a software is going to do all that for you, no, it's working together with a vendor that really understands what you're trying to do, right? And understands your processes, and also not where you're at today, but where you might want to go. Like, you know, I don't want to get off topic, but when Amazon sends me an email and they say, hey, you might be interested in this, they kind of know me by this point. Like, they know what I'm interested in. And there's something about that where they're trying to anticipate where I need to go. Your vendor should be like that as well. How can they help you solve problems that may be emerging or new requirements that may be coming up as well? I'm just going to stop here. I'm just going to switch my screen for a moment and get ready. Sam, just, you know, as I do that, maybe, or Chris, if you have anything else to add, but I'm just going to prep for the short demo.
Sure. So Chris, just wanted to pick your brain a little bit. I mean, we started off this conversation just talking about, you know, how pay and compensation has changed from, you know, a lot of the past practices really based on the individual. And now we're moving more into teams, cross-functional teams and so forth. So how have you seen this change on the system side? What are your clients requesting as a response to that?
In terms of cross-functional, it's there's some interesting things going on, and there's a couple organizations we've been talking to lately where they're running. They have what they call the guild hierarchy, which is kind of their practice discipline hierarchy, and then they also have kind of a team. So you have this So I could be a designer, but I roll up to, say, the chief creative officer, but I also participate in a team that produces this product. So you have two people now collaborating on a single merit or bonus. So you now have to create individuals who have different reporting, multiple reporting structures, and those would have different rules in them as well. So, you know, nearly impossible to do without a platform. It's really interesting to start to see that, and you're seeing a lot more of that in a Silicon Valley than in team-based structures. But be able to manage that and easily manage it, you need, like, the platform's completely designed to manage those types of hierarchies and those kind of multilateral types of decision making, versus you can only imagine trying to move a spreadsheet back and forth for all these folks and making sure you got the right one. But in a system, you can actually do that. So, having different folks to roll up to and being judged on how good am I as a team member, one, and then how good am I at my actual skill or my actual my craft. Right, two different types of considerations that they have to report back into.
That's really interesting. So what you're seeing is that in a lot of traditional structures and so forth, our managers make a lot of the decisions, or pool, or people that are responsible for the pool. But now you're seeing that there's information or decisions that are made by groups that impact the final decision of an employee.
100%, 2 or 3 different people potentially, right? That are maybe allocating their own, or they have to come to terms with one together. So those people even need to collaborate, which is, again, it's, I think it seems to be working quite well, but there's certainly even more complexity in trying to manage that.
Great.
All right, well, we can see your screen here, Perry. Looks
great.
pretty fancy.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to relate this back to sort of our previous conversation. Is I'm not going to go through feature by feature, but the way our platform works is it really is meant to be a single point of entry for different user profiles. So I'm logged in here as a power user, as somebody who might be on the comp team, but from a leader perspective, I may only see 1 tile, I may see 3 tiles, I may see 4 or 5. And we set you up in terms of assigning roles. So what are typical profiles in our system? A bonus planning manager, an executive, an HR business partner, comp team professional, an auditor, a system admin. And what we do is think of these tiles, if you will, as apps. So, we can create a special function, if you will, that only potentially a handful of people may see. In some cases, finance, as an example, they may only have access to the reports tile, and they can come in and actually run their reports, and you can anonymize the data. But what I really wanted to focus in on is the replacement piece, if you will, from a spreadsheet perspective. So just to kind of give you some background on this example, this is an instance of CompTrak about for a company of 20,000 employees that merged. They are up getting close to 1,000 spreadsheets. So they had created spreadsheets for these different processes: bonus, base pay, and LTIP. And we worked with them to say, okay, one, they're separated because they have different leaders for these functions. They're tied to a different phase, so you can actually open the decision-making process up at different times. So let me just go through. So instead of actually sending out a spreadsheet, I now have a dashboard or a leader or a screen like this that actually instantaneously gives me visibility in terms of what's my budget, what's my spend, what's my variance. I can still download the data if I want to, so I can actually still analyze this in Excel, but I can also see my directs. So these are all the employees that actually report to me. And if they're blue shaded, that means they actually have people that report to them. So I can still drill down from a tree perspective and I can see their dashboard. And I can also look at a summary of these people in terms of my indirects to see where they're spending. So just as people are entering decisions in, this is all being refreshed real time. And you'll see where I'm going with this, but it's also refreshed at a corporate level. So from an executive perspective, I can actually see what's happening. So just going back to my direct information, what we've really tried to do is when I click on an employee, I'm not getting a continuous screen that scrolls across. Our designers have really worked in terms of how do we segment the information. And most of this information is coming from the HR system. It's the bonus decisions, the bonus calculations that CompTrak is generating and retaining. So, this is just demographic information, where they're at. These are kind of the parameters that drive their compensation or bonus plan in terms of business factors and performance, individual performance, and these can be refreshed during the cycle. Here, I'm given a visual presentation of different key metrics, so I can kind of see the breakdown. And then this is the information that's asking me to update. So when I say things should be intuitive, I can actually just, change what the number is. And this is specific to each client, and the number will be updated. And then, what I can actually do, I talked about input history. I can see the history here in terms of who's made changes and how they made changes. And then I can actually, based on the sort that I did on the previous grid, I can actually move to the next employee and make my decision. And it's interesting, somebody once asked me, and this can be configured differently where I wanted to, I can make the decision right in the grid. But, when we started off as a company, we worked with a business and we went through how should the leader go through and make a decision. And we kind of settled on that, if you can't spend 20 or 30 seconds really looking and reflecting on the employee that you're making the decision for, there's probably an issue there. So what we tried to do is really give the leader a full comprehensive view of what that experience should be, but also make it very intuitive with the information that they need. When I'm done, I can actually submit this for a review to my leader for approval. So, very simple. The bonus plan, is it simple? Well, it's driven by a variety of things. And I think behind this, there's 10 to 12 bonus plans with different rules and different business factors. But for the leader, it's very intuitive. When I go back, base pay is again, as I mentioned, this can be combined, except the information here now is a little bit different, but we leverage a framework that still provides the same information. And so here I get my summary of all my indirects. And then if I actually want to click on an employee, so I'm going to click on this one, the information now that I have is a little bit different. So here I can actually put in different increases. And if I was eligible for a market increase or a promotion increase, it would be enabled. And this is all managed in the back end. And then we can put in things like what the performance rating was, what a pre and post comp ratio is. As I tell our clients, your data is important. What you call a particular field is very important, and we will configure it to your specific needs. And this is a great example where when we worked with this client, we learned, one of the things about when you're doing an implementation and learning about them, you ask them, and we're often invited into our clients' debrief sessions. And so they are saying, we're handling promotions outside of the tool. What would it take to kind of incorporate it into CompTrak? And so in year 2, we added this little button that actually allows the leader to actually put in a requested promotion and put in all the factors in terms of what the position would be, are they eligible, and it actually builds up to what that salary structure would look like, and it's routed for approval. And we didn't have any insight into that in terms of year 1, but in working with the clients and getting their feedback, kind of year 2, the question is what are some other pain points that we can actually incorporate into CompTrak? And so just another example. And then, what we typically have here are these review screens, so that when I click on review, this is where now if I'm a comp team or an executive, I see the entire hierarchy that I'm responsible for. And so at an organizational view, I'm sure one of the things that you're asked is, okay, am I over or under budget? Well, I just sort by over or under, and I can quickly see who's over, who's under, who's submitted. I can actually go in, and if I wanted to, I can actually proxy in as that user and see what decisions they made. So, when you start to think of workflow, there's no spreadsheets having to go back and forth. It's all incorporated into the screen. And, same thing with base pay, except my columns here now are a little bit different. They're segmented by the market budget, the merit budget, and the over-under. Supporting all of these front-end screens are administrative screens. And I'm not going to go into this, but, administrative tools in terms of creating your rules that relate to different plans, setting up your market, your merit budget, your midpoints, all of that information is critical. Your locations is all here. And this will be different from client to client. And then here we have the ability to kind of do a comprehensive view. So if I call up Perry, I can see all the attributes that is driving the decisions, what my target is, my eligibility, who my leader is, and I can quickly jump to those decisioning screens. So imagine if I'm an HR business partner and I'm talking to a leader, I can actually see exactly what they're seeing and help them in terms of supporting them as they go through the bonus cycle. So that's, I wanted to show you this. And the other component that I wanted to just show you quickly as well is we have something here called My Statement. And I love doing online statements. It's kind of like an area because they're all a little bit different and creative. And one of our first clients that we worked with on this was Sephora, the cosmetic company, which is a big also designer company. And so they did some really interesting things with us. But this is just an example of how you can actually have your employees come in and see, you know, and you on a phone, you can also have a mobile experience when they hover over, it explains to them what the different components are. So to me, a good total reward statement incorporates your culture, your brand. You know, it's very powerful, and it should be more than just numbers. It should be an education, a reflection of your brand. And then what we can also do is break down things into compensation. So base salary, if I'm using something like a midpoint, I can show a comp ratio. I can actually show something like, how's my bonus calculated? So let me just scroll down here where it actually shows the formula. And then if I have LTIP awards, this could be dynamic. So an LTIP tab comes and you're reminding somebody in terms of all the grants that they got. You know, so you're really actually sending information back. What we did for one client is we actually gave them the opportunity to model out what their LTIP awards would look like based on a different price. And then, you know, highlight your benefits. This is one way to display it in terms of showing what's paid by the company, what is paid by the employee. And also perks. A lot of times we don't tell people about things like work from home or subsidized lunches or those types of things. And then we also have our culture. So, you know, these are our values at CompTrak, different places that we've been a part of. You know, we like to barbecue here and what have you. So good way of actually showing those things that make your company unique.
Yeah,
and then,
I like that. I like that, Perry, the real Canadian there, the axe throwing. That's great.
well, yeah. So yeah, there's a few other things we do too, but yeah, but I always think too, like your value should mean something, and this is a great way to bring it to life. And I credit, you know, our design team who really spend a lot of time. Your online statement has to be your own. It can't just be a template. And then here you can explain, you know, what the benefits are. So lots of really good information that you can incorporate in. So this is kind of our, you know, a very high level overview of CompTrak. And if anyone is interested, Chris and I and the team are more than happy to spend time with you and really understanding your plans and how CompTrak and our team could help you go through this automation process.
Great.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Perry. I know we've gone through a lot of information here. And so once again, if anybody that would like to go through a more detailed demo, just feel free to sign up through that poll. You can just, I think you just launch it. If you close it, you can launch it again from the bottom of your screen there. And then we'll set one up so you can look at CompTrak in greater detail there. So. But I want to thank everybody for joining. We're reaching the bottom of our hour here. I think that if there's any more questions, please put them in the chat, and we can take those real quick. If not, go ahead.
I do see a question about can CompTrak cover internal equity analysis? Yes, we often bring in additional information and have a fairly robust reporting engine that can slice and dice information and you know, identify potential inequities and opportunities where to focus in on. So that's something we currently do during the cycle and off cycle as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the question.
And so it's just as far as I know these systems can range in implementation time from anywhere from you know, 3 weeks to 6 months. So what typically drives the implementation time of a particular company?
Great question, and probably not a big difference than what you're used to in terms of your organization is one, we have to, we don't need big teams to kind of implement things in a very timely manner. We need access to people who can make decisions and share insights. Because as I mentioned at the outset, those details are important. And what I often find is when we're working with a client and we're going through the process, one of the things I like to do as part of the demo process is share with us your data model. Share with us some data, and we're happy to kind of show you what a configuration would look like. And it's also a way for our clients to validate, our, do we have the details? Like, did we understand this correctly? So and I find even in large organizations, the comp team is typically somewhat small. They're very agile thinking. So, and I'm not a believer in where you need days and days of somebody's time. It's more that agile, iterative approach where, we feed them, can you please validate? Can you please fill in some of the gaps? And it continuously goes. The example I showed you before, we started, I think we signed with them in late August and we're live early December. So it can happen quickly. They had one person dedicated to the project who was able to kind of get us answers on a very timely basis. We got involved as well in the training. I love being involved with our clients, like just in terms of that process. So it really depends on the company and their capacity as well.
Great. Thanks, Perry. All right. Any other questions before we close here? I'm just looking through the chat. All right.
There's one more question. How customizable is CompTrak for organizations?
Great question. So we feel it's very important to reflect, like if I showed you different instances of CompTrak, you'd notice some similarities, the tiles, the framework of the screens, but the data elements, the rules engine. It's interesting. Our largest client, we support 3 platforms. Each platform is different. One platform does a bottoms up budgeting, one does a top down, one makes certain fields visible, one doesn't. One calls, I think it's fixed comp versus total comp. So those things are very important to us. And when I talked about some of these large HR systems, that's where they fall down, is that their value is in trying to creating one sort of very encompassing solution, but it doesn't account for the nuances. And when you get into incentive comp, bonuses, equity, your sponsors and executives are used to seeing things in a certain way. And so we feel it's very important to reflect that. So it's very configurable within our framework, and our framework is extremely flexible where, as I said, there are modules that we have today that were influenced by our clients that were added onto CompTrak.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And we like, I have to say this, I love working with companies who are very innovative with their comp plans, who are going to push us in terms of an organization and have us thinking about things that, we maybe haven't thought about. One of the areas that we've just recently started doing a lot of work on is the dashboards, real-time dashboards that you can drill down deeply. We find that, finance loves their dashboards. So on a recent implementation, we just released a finance module that is specific to finance where they can pull their comp related data without seeing employee specific, like things like name. So thanks for that question, Howard.
Well, great. Well, we're here at the bottom of the hour, so I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Perry and Chris for joining us and sharing their wisdom today, and thank you so much. And just to remind everyone, if you have any further questions, or just shoot me an email at sam@compteam.net. That's sam@compteam.net. Or you can leave a final one here in the chat. We can take that offline. And also this presentation and the recording will be available on the CompTeam website in just about 2 days. It takes us to process this. So if you're interested, go there and take a look at that. We have also a lot of great content from our people strategy forums that are done weekly that are found on the website, as well as some great articles and so forth you can find. All right. Well, I want to say thank you for everyone for joining, and we'll catch you next week or next month, actually, for the rewards mastermind.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. All right. Bye.